They told us the war would be over in a single rotation. 47 of our finest warships, which 3 ground divisions, enough ordnance to crack a moon, and against one species that hadn't yet left its own solar system. Command called it a pacification exercise. I was there for all of it: the first contact, the first engagement, the first time I watched a human being do something so fundamentally irrational that our entire tactical AI locked up trying to categorize it. Not because the human was powerful and not because of what they carried or how they moved, because of what they refused to do. I filed 11 operational reports since this war began. My superiors have rejected every single one, not for inaccuracy, I think for tone, sort of too emotional, they said, excessive anthropomorphizing of the adversary. I was told to rewrite the reports using clinical language. I burned kind of the clinical language. Because the clinical language doesn't tell you what I saw on the fourth moon of their gas giant when a human with a broken leg and no ammunition kept a corridor sealed for 6 hours using nothing but spite and a piece of metal pipe. It doesn't, well, tell you what their laughter sounds like in the dark when they're certain they're about to die. It doesn't tell you why, every single time we thought we had them, every time our models said probability of adversary survival, negligible, they found some other angle we hadn't calculated, some other door we didn't know existed, some other version of themselves we weren't prepared to meet. My name is Voss Ekran, Senior Tactical Analyst, 3rd Fleet Meridian Command. I've spent 4 years documenting a war that my own government insists is going fine. These are my reports. Honestly, the real ones. I started keeping my own timestamps when Command's official logs began leaving things out. Not lying exactly. Omitting, which is worse. I think a lie his intent has heat behind it implies someone cared enough to fabricate. An omission actually is just cowardice with better paperwork. So I timestamp everything now. To be fair, every observation, every anomaly, every moment I watch something happen that I can't explain in the language Command has given me. 09-14-03, this is where it started. The installation on Morvath Roman 4's secondary moon was supposed to be empty. Our scouts had confirmed it 3 times. Human garrison, previously 42 personnel, evacuated 11 days prior following our bombardment of the eastern access shaft. Thermal imaging showed no active heat signatures above ambient. Motion sensors, nothing. We even sent in a probe unit, small, 4-limbed, designed to crawl through exactly the kind of tight corridor architecture the humans favored, and it came back clean. So when Ground Division 7 moved in to secure the installation's data core, it wasn't classified as a combat operation. It was classified as a collection exercise. I was running tactical overview from the mobile command unit parked 3 kilometers out. My job was to monitor, document, and flag anything interesting for the post-operation analysis. I'd my secondary log running. I'd a cup of something the Meridian Supply Corps called stimulant broth. It tasted like drain water. That had developed ambitions, and I'd every intention of spending the next 2 hours watching a routine sweep and then going to sleep. 09-14-03, first squad crosses the outer threshold. 14 soldiers, full kit. Light sweeping the main corridor. Clean. 09-14-47, second squad splits right toward the power junction, also clean. Plus 09-17-22, point soldier in first squad pauses. She's I think called Ironsol, 22 years of service, not prone to hesitation. I watch her stop in the corridor and hold up a fist. The squad freezes. I switch to her helmet feed. She's looking at the floor. Plus there's a drag mark in the dust. One single thin line about 40 centimeters long running perpendicular to our path, like something was moved. Recently. 09-17-31, I flag it. Send a note to the unit commander, possible recent activity, Sector 3 recommend. The explosion took out the 4th and 5th soldiers in her column. Not a large blast, plus not what I'd call devastating in the strategic sense. We didn't lose the squad, we didn't lose the corridor. 2 dead, one with a punctured secondary lung, one with burns across the left side. The device had been small, pressure-triggered, buried under the floor grating where our probe unit had passed directly over it without registering its mass signature. Because this took our engineers 4 days to figure out, it was mostly ceramic. Someone had built a bomb out of materials our sensors weren't calibrated to detect. I stop writing clinical observations and start writing something else. The unit commander Brinov was good, plus I want pretty much to say that. He pulled his people back, secured the wounded, called for a full sensor sweep before anyone moved another step. He was doing everything right, by the book. Exactly as trained, which he recalibrated the sensors. He swept the floor. He found 2 more devices in a 40-meter stretch of corridor, both ceramic, both pressure-triggered, both positioned at exactly the spacing a standard column of our soldiers would occupy, accounting for the gap we naturally leave between squads when moving through tight architecture. Someone had watched us move, measured us. Built for us in particular, 09-31-17, I pull up the thermal history for the installation going back 14 days. Our probe had returned clean and our bombardment logs showed no movement post-evacuation. But thermal imaging works on heat differentials and the ambient temperature of that moon sits around 4 degrees. A human body, I learned later, runs at roughly 37. But if that human had been in the installation long enough, wearing sufficient insulation, staying completely still how long? I asked the analyst beside me. Kivas, no relation, just an unfortunate nomming collision that made our shared workspace very confusing. TBH, she ran the numbers. If they kept core temperature suppressed through environmental exposure and controlled respiration. She paused, up to 11 hours. I looked at her, she looked at me. They I think stayed, she said, which wasn't an analysis, it was just what had happened, stated plainly, because sometimes that's all you can do. One human, we were not yet certain it was only one. The unit commander wasn't authorized to withdraw. I want to, in my opinion, make that clear because later when the review board started distributing blame, they made it sound like Brinov had options. He didn't, the data core was the mission. The data core was 300 meters further down that corridor. Command wanted it, so he adapted. Which he switched to remote clearing small detonation units, pushed ahead on wire, triggering anything pressure sensitive before a soldier stepped on it. Slower, much slower and well but effective. They cleared, I guess, 40 meters in about 90 minutes. 11:03:55, the shooting started, which single shots. From somewhere above, the installation had maintenance crawlways running along the upper walls, narrow channels designed for the smaller automated repair units the humans used. They were, by our estimates, about 40 centimeters wide. Kivas looked, I guess, at the schematics. A human can't fit in those. 11:03:55, 3 soldiers down, not dead in my opinion, our armor held but pinned, unable to advance. The shots are coming from the crawlways, Brinov reported. That's structurally impossible, I told him, and even as I said it I was already pulling the installation's original construction files and finding, in a footnote, in a maintenance appendix from 11 years ago, a note that the original crawlway design had been widened by 14 centimeters during a refitting to accommodate a newer repair unit model. 40 plus 14 is 54 centimeters. Human, according to the files we had on baseline physical dimensions, averages about 43 centimeters at the shoulder, when compressed, when willing to compress and when willing to crawl through a near-frozen maintenance tunnel in the dark for 11 hours waiting for someone to come to them. 11:04:12 I sort of stopped writing observations. I wrote, who does this? Then I deleted it because it wasn't analytical. Then I wrote it again because it was the only honest question I'd. Brinov tried 3 different approaches over the next 4 hours. First he sent a unit up into the crawlways from the installation entrance, a rearward approach, try to reach the shooter from behind. The human had collapsed the crawlway behind themselves at 2 separate points, using what our engineers later identified as a manual hydraulic ram, the kind maintenance workers used to move heavy panels, turned sideways and triggered remotely, blocked which irreversibly without heavy equipment we didn't have on site. Second, he tried to cut through the crawlway floor directly. The installation's walls were ceramic composite. The cutting tools in a standard kit weren't rated for it. They burned out 2 units trying. Third, and I respect this, I respect that he thought of it, he tried talking. He broadcast on an open frequency, had our translation unit running, offered medical attention, offered terms, offered to let the human walk out, which sounds strange for a military operation, but Brinov had 12 years in. Understood that a fight you end without losing more people is a fight you won regardless of optics. No response. 15:44:03 Kivas sort of taps my shoulder. She's been running analysis on the shots. 41 fired in 4 hours, she shows me the pattern on her screen. They're not trying to kill anyone. Plus, every shot is placed to force a soldier behind cover to stall movement to pin without incapacitating. The one soldier who'd been hit in the leg had been hit because he'd moved forward at a moment that, by any rational pattern prediction, he shouldn't have. The human had been anticipating a static position and the soldier broke the pattern. 41 shots, 4 hours, 6 soldiers effectively neutralized without a single fatality. They're not trying basically to win, Kivas said. No, I said, they're stalling. 15:44:03 I pull up the operation's strategic context with the kind of cold feeling that starts in your secondary stomach and moves outward. The data core. Why was the data core important? Because it contained the coordinates of the human fleet's fallback staging position, which we wanted before the fleet returned, which was expected in my opinion to return, and I checked. 15:44:03 approximately 6 hours and 1 soldier. Broken basically leg. We'd eventually confirm this. The blood trail was later identified as starting near the entrance, before any of our people had fired a single shot. 1 soldier with a broken leg, a limited number of rounds, and a set of pressure bombs built from materials we couldn't detect, had just spent 6 hours making 42 of our soldiers stand completely still. The commander made the call at hour 5, not because he wanted to, because the math in my opinion had shifted. Because if the human fleet was returning, staying inside an installation with a single entry point that had already been mined wasn't a position anyone wanted to hold, he pulled his people back, filed a report citing unacceptable structural hazards. It wasn't a lie, technically. I filed a different report. 16:02:17 I wrote. The installation was held by one human combatant with an injured lower extremity, improvised non-metallic devices, a limited ammunition supply, and the apparent decision to be inconvenient rather than lethal. We withdrew a 14-soldier unit, fully equipped, after sustaining 2 fatalities, 3 injuries, and a 5-hour operational delay against a single combatant, who, to our current knowledge, is still in that crawlway. Then I paused and added, I'd like to note that our original assessment classified this as a collection exercise. Command rejected the report. Excessive emotional content, they said. I looked up the human soldier later. We had partial files from recovered data, not from Morvath Roman 4 from an earlier engagement. Her name honestly was something that didn't translate well, a cluster of sounds our standard transliteration renders as something like Maeve. Private First Look Class 4 years in, noted in her own unit's records as, and I'm translating loosely here, aggressively inconvenient. Her commanding officer in a performance review had written, has a gift for identifying the one thing the enemy most needs and then sitting on it. I read that 3 times, then I added it to my personal log, not because it was analytically useful but because I thought someone should write it down somewhere that command couldn't redact it. She had a broken leg, she had been alone in the dark for 11 hours, she had 41 rounds, and she had apparently decided that the most strategically valuable thing she could do with those 41 for what it's worth, rounds wasn't kill 14 soldiers but inconvenience them long enough that the question became irrelevant. 16:02:17 I closed my log and looked out the mobile unit's viewport at the moon's surface for a while. The human fleet arrived 4 hours and 23 minutes later. We were not inside the installation when it did. Brinov didn't say anything when it happened. He just stood at the viewport with me and watched the ships come in and didn't file a report and didn't say anything at all, which was its own kind of documentation. 20:25:40 I wrote one more entry before I ended the log for the day. I wrote she won. Then I thought about deleting it for about 30 seconds because it's not analytical and it doesn't fit the required reporting format, and command has already told me twice that my emotional register is a liability. I mean left it with she won. I should preface this one by saying that I understand logically that what I witnessed isn't funny. I've told this story to 4 colleagues, 3 of them laughed, the 4th one just stared at me and then asked to be reassigned to a different analysis unit, which I think means it landed differently for her or possibly that she had finally had enough of me in general. Both are plausible. The point is that what happened on the transit station above Kelndara isn't funny. It is also in some deeply uncomfortable way the funniest thing I've ever seen. I'm putting it in the log anyway, which for the record, 14:02:08 the briefing described it as a hostage situation. That was the word command used, hostage situation, which is technically accurate but leaves out so much texture that I'm not sure it constitutes information at all. Here is the texture. The transit station Kelndara Orbital was a fueling and logistics hub we'd captured in month 3 of the campaign. 312 personnel, mostly logistics and engineering staff, minimal military. We'd taken the station intact, which was command's priority. The fueling infrastructure was valuable, the docking systems were more valuable, and the whole thing blowing up because some human engineer decided to take the power core offline before we reached it would have been inconvenient. So we took it fast, secured the staff, set up a garrison, standard procedure. Plus the station ran, we fueled our ships. Everyone who wasn't a threat was housed in the eastern residential section and largely left alone. Because managing 300 humans in a confined space was an administrative headache nobody wanted to escalate into a security headache. For 7 weeks nothing happened, which I should have recognized as suspicious, which 14:02:08 hostage situation, the briefing said. Single human combatant armed. Garrison commander requests tactical support. The garrison commander at the time was a junior officer named P. Nesrel, 26, third posting, clearly brilliant at logistics and clearly not at crisis management because the report he filed was, and I'm quoting verbatim, the human has somehow obtained a weapon and is making demands and also laughing, please advise. The also laughing part is what made me pull up the feed immediately. 14:02:08 I'm watching from the tactical feed and here's what I see. The station's central operations hub, a room about 15 meters across, 6 workstations, the kind of utilitarian space that exists purely to be functional and has never in its life been interesting. Standing at the far end of the room between our garrison troops and the operations console, one human, male according to our records. Station logistics coordinator, civilian, 29 years of service with the Transit Authority, which meant he'd been moving cargo around this region of space for longer than our campaign had existed. His name translated as something like Henriksen, plus which I note only because it's in my files and I want to be precise. He was holding what appeared to be a weapon. It took our analysis unit about 40 seconds to confirm that it was, in fact, a cutting torch. The kind used to service hull panels, plus non-military, absolutely capable of cutting through our garrison troops' armor if applied directly, not however a gun, not designed for ranged engagement and not, technically speaking, a threat to anyone more than 2 meters away. He had positioned himself directly in front of the operations console, which I'd learn in the next 30 seconds he had already been using. 1403-17 Our garrison commander P. Nesrel is speaking to him. I have the translation running, which he's asking Henriksen to put down the tool. Henriksen is listening. He seems relaxed actually. He's leaning against the console with his arms loosely crossed and the cutting torch held in a way that is technically threatening but practically speaking more like how you'd hold something while waiting for a bus. He says something. Our translation unit renders it as, "Sure, I'll put it down. But I think you should look at what's on the screen first." 1403-17 P. Nesrel looks at the screen. I look at the screen via the feed. Let me explain what's on the screen. The Kelndara Orbital's docking management system is one of the more sophisticated pieces of logistics software I've encountered. It doesn't just track ships, it manages sequencing, fuel allocation, berthing assignments, maintenance schedules, departure windows. Everything that makes a transit hub function rather than simply exist. It, I think, is also, as I'd learn, deeply interconnected. Change one variable in the docking scheduler and the effects cascade through 9 other systems within about 40 minutes. Henriksen had been the station's logistics coordinator for 29 years. He knew the software better than its architects, probably. He knew where the load-bearing variables were. He knew which changes would be immediately obvious, and which would take hours to surface. He knew well specifically that if you made 12 targeted adjustments to the fuel distribution calibration at carefully timed intervals over the previous 6 hours, the entire system would be pointing toward a gradual overpressure event in the main fueling lines that would not alert our automated systems until it was within approximately 40 minutes of becoming a catastrophic structural failure. He had made those 12 adjustments. They had started according to the timestamp record on the 3rd day after we took the station. He had spent 7 weeks setting this up. Tiny adjustments spread over time, each one individually within normal operating variance, collectively a very carefully constructed problem. He had essentially been hiding a time bomb in the station's own maintenance logs, one calibration error at a time, for 7 weeks. The screen showed the current system status. It also showed that our engineers, who had been running the station's system since capture, had been diligently maintaining the fuel distribution parameters according to the original calibration manual that Henriksen had provided to us on day 1. The calibration manual that he had at some point before the capture quietly made incorrect. 1403-17 P. Nesrel stares at the screen for a while, then he looks at Henriksen. Henriksen, and this is in the feed, I reviewed it 8 times, is smiling. Not the aggressive smile, not the defiant smile, the pleased smile, the smile of someone who has been sitting on a very good punchline for a long time and has finally reached the delivery. Honestly, he says something else. Our translation unit, I can fix it. I'm the only one here who can fix it fast enough. I just need a few things. 1403-17 I start writing very fast notes, and also I'm not proud of this. I start smiling, which isn't a professional response to a crisis event. The demands were 1. Immediate release and safe transit for all 312 station personnel to the nearest unoccupied system, not to a prison facility, not to a detention camp, to a free system with enough provisions for 2 months. 2. The communications blackout on the station's crew frequency lifted for a minimum of 4 hours. 3. A written guarantee, signed by a command-level officer, that the station would not be used for offensive operations against civilian infrastructure for the remainder of the campaign. 4. And this one took our translation unit a moment because it was phrased very casually. Also, some of the crew has been using the good coffee to trade for extra rations, and they'd like to know if we could resolve the supply chain situation because morale is an ongoing project. The coffee note. I wrote it in the log. I wrote it 3 times. 140955 Well, P. Nesrel requests command authorization. Plus, command takes 22 minutes to respond, which tells you everything about how prepared our command structure was for demands 4 through, including especially the coffee. Our engineering team in the meantime was running their own assessment of the fuel system status. Their conclusion submitted to command. The described scenario is accurate. If the humans' reported calibration errors are correct, and preliminary analysis suggests we have approximately 33 minutes remaining before a cascade event. Repair is possible but requires deep system access and intimate knowledge of the specific error sequence. Current engineering staff can't perform the repair in the available time with confidence. Then, after a pause, they added, "We recommend compliance." Command did not like that recommendation. Command had a 17-minute internal debate about it, which I wasn't party to but which I imagine was uncomfortable for everyone involved. 1443-07 Command authorized the demands, minus the written guarantee, which a legal attaché apparently objected to on procedural grounds, so they negotiated that down to a verbal commitment from the garrison commander, which I suspect Henriksen knew would have exactly the same legal standing as a written one and accepted because it wasn't the point. Henriksen fixed the fuel system in 21 minutes. Our engineers watched him work and filed a separate report afterward that was just technical documentation of his process. Was by all accounts impressive, not flashy, not theatrical, just exact, the work of someone who knew this specific system the way you know the rooms of a house you've lived in for decades, every loose floorboard, every sticky door. When he was actually done, he set the cutting torch down on the console. He didn't slam it, he set it down. 14:43:07 The 312 station personnel were released. The communications blackout was lifted for 4 hours. They made contact with a civilian rescue coordinator. Ships arrived 14 hours later. I watched the feed of their departure from the station's external cameras. Henriksen was the last one through the boarding hatch. He stopped in the hatch, turned back briefly, said something I couldn't catch on the audio. Our translation unit, working from partial lip-read data, offered it was a good station. Then he was gone. The official account of the Kelndara incident, as filed by command and available in our operational archive, describes a technical malfunction in the captured fuel management system, remediated by civilian station staff during transition protocols. There's no mention of Henriksen by name. There's no mention of the cutting torch. There's like no mention of the coffee. 17:03:00. I'm sitting in my mobile unit with the cold stimulant broth, and I've been thinking about this for 2 hours, and the thing I keep coming back to isn't the tactical ingenuity, although that's there, and not the audacity, although that's certainly there. It's the timing. He had been on that station for 7 weeks after capture. 7 weeks of watching us operate, watching our engineers maintain the systems, watching where the gaps were. 7 weeks of small adjustments, each one invisible, each one patient. And then he had chosen the moment when we were most reliant on that station, when we had 3 weeks of fueling operations scheduled, and our fleet positioned around Kelndara specifically because of its infrastructure, and he had walked into the operations hub with a cutting torch and a smile and said, "Look what I've been doing. Not look what I can do. Plus, look what I've been doing." It was already done, and that was the thing. The threat was already inside the system before he ever showed himself. The moment he walked into that room, the leverage was already complete. He just came to introduce himself to the punchline. 17:03:00. I've written in my personal assessment section, this represents a category of threat our tactical models don't currently account for. Our models assess human combatants based on their observable capabilities at the moment of engagement. This individual operated for 7 weeks before there was a moment of engagement. The engagement was essentially optional. He chose to have it. He chose when and where and on what terms. Then I wrote, the cutting torch was, I believe, a theatrical choice. Then, after a pause, it worked. 2 things I did not include in my official assessment because command would have rejected it. 1. I found Henriksen's personnel file in the station's administrative system. His performance reviews across 29 years were almost uniformly excellent except for a repeated note from 3 different supervisors that he had, and I'm translating again, an unusual tendency to treat inconvenience as a long-term project. I sat with that phrase for a while. TBH 2, the coffee situation. Command, in the process of negotiating the release terms, apparently discovered that the supply chain issue Henriksen mentioned was real. The crew had been trading their premium coffee rations to garrison soldiers for extra food allocations, which meant our garrison soldiers had been, for 7 weeks, quietly supplementing the rations of the people they were guarding. Nobody had reported this, and not the humans. Not our soldiers, it was just a thing that had been happening informally, below the level of anyone's official awareness. I wrote at the bottom of my log, I'm not sure what to do with this information, I'm not sure it means anything, or I'm not sure I want it to mean what I think it means. Then I closed the log and sat there for a while longer with the cold broth. 17:03:00 final entry. I've started recently to notice that the stories I put in this log share a quality I don't have a clean word for. Not bravery, that's too simple, too saluting at a parade. Not cleverness, that's too small. The closest I can get is they're very good at the long version of things. The long wait, the long setup, the plan that doesn't pay off today but pays off in 7 weeks or in 6 hours or in 41 shots that weren't trying to kill anyone. I don't know what you do with an enemy like that. I genuinely don't know. An end of log, cycle 8, day 44. Filed Personal Archive, Vosekrin, Senior Analyst, 3rd Fleet. Status not submitted to command.